Hello. Thanks for coming. It's lovely to be back in Shanghai. I actually walked all the way here. I walked from the Bund for 2 hours to come here, just to see a bit of Shanghai that I wouldn't normally see. And it was very enlightening, very interesting city. Cool, so I'm going to talk a bit about Polkadot. There's a few points I want to cover, but I would also like to leave lots of time for questions at the end, because I'm sure whatever I do cover won't be what most of you want to know. So the thing I'm going to cover is a bit about staking, how to stake on Polkadot, because I figure there might be some people who are interested in doing that. I'm also going to talk a little bit about parachains and how they're going to be sold off. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, I don't know, governance and maybe one or two other bits. But first, staking. So you want to stake on Polkadot. Who wants to stake on Polkadot? Anyone interested in doing that? Yeah, room full of hands. So why bother staking? Well, there's rewards. You get paid for it, or you don't suffer inflation, depending on which way you look at it. So we're probably going to cap inflation at 10%, so it's probably going to be like single figure percentage. The 10% will only be the inflation level if everything is perfect. We're targeting around 50% of the tokens would be involved in staking. So if you work that through, that's about 20% annual return for stakers that are 100% staked. There are reasons why you might not want to stake. Your tokens have to be locked for a while if you're a staker. This is to solve the nothing at stake problem. The amount of time that they'll be locked will be probably around 12-week sort of period. And if, as a staker, if you're sort of found to be misbehaving or not doing your job properly, then there is a level of punishment. The punishment is designed to be minimal if it's not coordinated with any other stakers. So as long as you're kind of it's a mistake, you're sort of on your own, then it won't, well, it shouldn't, it's designed not to cost very much. It becomes a lot more costly if like half of the network all makes a mistake at the same time, yeah? Because then it's interpreted as a sort of attack, and it's important to try and prevent those. So there's two kinds of staking as a staker that you can do: validating and nominating. You can also be idle, but there's not much point being idle, because then you're not doing anything, you're not making any money. You're locked up, you're not making any money. So validation is all about running a secure node, right? So you run a node, you keep it connected, 24/7 uptime, good connectivity, and it's got to be secure. If it's not secure, someone's going to steal your keys. They're going to basically make you misbehave and then report you for misbehaving, and it's going to cost you money. So you've got to run a secure node. Ultimately, as a validator, you have to be one of the selected validators, which means you have to have a bunch of stake behind you, but it's a stake backing you. Now that can be your stake, but it can also be other people's stake if they nominate you, right? So if you don't have enough funds in maybe about 5,000 dots once the network's properly bootstrapped up, if you don't have that level, and not that many people will, then you can still kind of advertise to try and get other people to nominate you and get their backing. And with that backing, you can try and become one of those 1,000 that are selected. Nominators don't need to be selected. Everyone can nominate, and if you nominate, as long as you nominate people that are worth nominating, as far as the system's concerned, then you'll get you'll get paid. Now the trick with nominating is to select less popular but still competent validators. Yeah? So if you kind of just forget that and you just like select the popular validators that everyone else is backing, then they're going to be oversubscribed, right? And there's only a certain amount of dots that go to each validator, or each slot that each validator's in. Which means that if they're oversubscribed, then the amount of dots is shared between loads and loads of people. So you don't get very many. So your reward goes down. Yeah? So if you select the less popular ones, then your reward will go up. But it'll only go up as long as they're competent. If they're not competent, and they end up getting slashed, then your dots go down again. So you've got to make sure that they're competent, but not so popular. And to do that, you've got to do your research. So really, being a good nominator is about researching. And in some sense, being a good validator, apart from running the secure node and things, is about making sure there's enough information about you online so that nominators can find you and decide that you're a good guy, decide that you're competent, and put their dots behind you. Yeah. So it's really a kind of a market going on. So in terms of the protocol, it works by this sort of algorithm that we have that sort of vaguely, and I use the term, in a little bit cynical way, to intelligently share each nominator's funds around the validators that they approve of. As a nominator, you don't need to choose a single validator. You can choose a bunch of them, right? And the system will basically apportion each of the funds between these validators that you approve of. Some of them, if they've got loads of nominators behind them, then your funds not many funds are going to go there because they're oversubscribed. So it'll try and put your funds to validators that are less subscribed to try and maximize your profits, right? And, as it happens, also maximize the security of Polkadot. So the algorithm, strictly speaking, maximizes the minimally backed validator, because that's our security threshold. If there's an attacker coming along and they want to attack Polkadot by spending money, right, and buying off a validator or two, they're not going to buy the most expensive ones, the ones that have got loads and loads of backing. They're going to buy off the cheapest ones, yeah? So they're going to basically, our security level, if you want to measure it, is how much is the minimally backed validator, how many dots is that? So we try and maximize that in order to try and lift Polkadot security. And that's what this algorithm does. Now the economics are also kind of interesting. The payout is proportional to that figure, to the security threshold, right? To the minimally backed validator. So the validator that has the least amount of funds backing it, the one that can be slashed the least, the one that can be punished the least, the one, basically, for which if they badly behave and they attack the network, it will cost the least. But the punishment is proportional to the funds backing that validator that's misbehaving, right? And what this does is it creates a mismatched risk-reward between the validators. The ones that are oversubscribed have a much higher risk because all of those funds can be slashed, right? But the reward is the same for all of them, yeah? So the risk-reward is different. The one at the bottom has a much better level of reward for the risk that they have. And as such, the system basically tries to incentivize people to even everything out and to back all of the validators more or less the same. Yeah? So it's a bit of a market mechanism going on there as well. So the specifics, and I won't go over this for too long because probably not many of you really need to know, but if any of you are sort of thinking of developing user interfaces or whatever for the staking system, then you'll want to be a bit more on the specifics of the operations that can be done. So I'll tell you a little bit about them. Basically, there's like 5 operations, more or less. Becoming a staker, we call bonding, which basically means taking free funds, funds that aren't bonded, that you can move around, sell, whatever, and turning them into locked funds, staked funds, right? Then validating, so becoming a validator once you're bonded. Then nominating, so switching to becoming a nominator once you're bonded. Idling, or whatever else. And unbonding, so taking the funds that are bonded and like unbonding them so you can like trade them or send them elsewhere or whatever. First thing to understand is there's two accounts in the Polkadot model. Two different accounts that hold funds that can send transactions. First one's called Stash, the Stash account. This is where all of the funds are stored, really. The ones that are like going to be locked up, that's the Stash account. Yeah? And the other account is the controller account. They're the ones that actually does all of the nuts and bolts. The operations like, I want to validate, I want to nominate, I want to change my whatever preferences. So you've got these two different accounts. And the idea is that the Stash account is meant to be kind of cold, sort of paper wallet, and it's only used for fund transfers and to tell you who the controller account is. It can set the controller account. But the controller is a bit different. It can do a few more things. It does sort of more day-to-day operations. In addition to those two, there's also a session key, or a set of session keys, that do the actual minute-to-minute or second-to-second operations. That's super hot. It sits on a node, you actually push it into your node, you set a command line option with it or whatever, and you tell it, this is the key that I want you to author blocks with. And this is the one that actually sort of is at greatest risk of being stolen. So you want to keep this to be the sort of least powerful key. If you want a little diagram, here's a little diagram. So you've got the Stash key, that's the coldest, and that's where everything starts. Yeah? That's the most authority of the system. It's only used for bonding and transferring funds. You don't want to have a key that can control all of your DOT tokens being the same key that's used to like author blocks, or even like use the day-to-day to set different preferences or nominate different validators. You want those to be different keys, because honestly, this key, you're going to put in a safe somewhere and you're never going to touch for months at a time. Yeah, it's going to be super cold. The controller key is warm, so maybe it's not on your computer. It's certainly not running in the node software, but maybe it's on like a device that you carry around with you. It doesn't hold very many funds, but if someone ever got hold of it, they could use it to sort of attack you by making you do the wrong thing. They could set different preferences, yeah, or they could nominate the wrong validators or whatever. That's used then to set a session key, and that happens once every maybe hour or so, maybe once a day, depending on how sort of paranoid you are. And that's hot. That sits in the node and it does the things that you need to do to be a validator, right? It authors blocks, it attests to parachains, and it does a couple of other things. So if you want to start bonding, you do this bond function. You call it from the Stash account, and you name the controller. You also name some preferences. The interesting sort of preferences, you can just if you have lots and lots of funds, you don't want to necessarily put all of them, bond all of them. You can bond just a small amount of them if you want. You don't need to bond all of them. And you can say how much of it you want to bond there when you start. You can also set who it is you want to reward. Different people might want to reward different sort of accounts. So if you want to get the payout and sort of spend it immediately, then you might want to stick it in the controller account, which you can do, yeah? And then it's ready to be sent to an exchange or some separate wallet somewhere. If you want it, on the other hand, if you want to just like accrue as fast as you can, then you can put it right into the staking pool of your validator or your nominator. And then as time goes on, it will just cumulatively build up. You can also just put it in the Stash account, which will keep it safe, but won't add it into the bonding pool, so it won't sort of cumulatively build up, but it will be. I don't know why you'd really want to do that, to be honest, but it's there as an option. You can also bond some more funds if you didn't bond enough initially, or if you transfer some more funds in, you can sort of top it up. You can set it to validate. Now this comes from a controller account. This is one of the things that a controller account can do. So you can say, right, now I've bonded, I want to become a validator, or try to become a validator. You get to set some preferences. At the moment, the preferences are basically how long you want to be offline for before you recognize this being offline. The longer you're offline before you recognize this being offline, the more you're slashed when you do get eventually thrown out. Some people might want to set that to a different value to others. You also can set how much you take home as a validator before the funds get split up, become apportioned between yourself and the nominators, right? So, might be that some validators are really oversubscribed and they want to sort of make themselves a bit less attractive to the nominators, so they just take more funds out before it gets shared, before the rewards get shared, yeah? Again, facilitates a market mechanism to try and make sure that those slots become reasonably even. You can also nominate, in which case you'll say which of the validators you approve of. Very simple, that one. Unbonding is also very simple. You're just going to say how much you want to unbond. Very simple. It's the controller that does that. Now the thing is, unbonding takes a while. As I said before, it takes about 12 weeks on the main net. On the test net, it takes a day, so not very long, but main net will be longer. After that 12-week period is up, you'll need to actually ping it again and say, I would actually like to unlock those now unbonded funds. So if you're writing a UI, you probably want to do this so that the user doesn't need to. If you want to become idle, then you can use this chill. That makes you idle. And you can also reset the controller account from the stash if you want. So selection for the validator sets happens every 24 hours. Yeah? So it's not instant. If a new validator comes in and they have a bunch of new funds, they have to sort of wait most of the day before their funds will be recognized as getting them into the validator set, and everything will be sort of re-evaluated and they'll be rechosen. As I mentioned before, there's an algorithm, a smart algorithm used to determine who should validate. And as I mentioned before as well, nominators are going to be split up in an optimal way for backing those validators. Okay. So that's the staking system. That's probably more or less final. I mean, you know, notwithstanding audits and so on, but we're pretty happy with that, and I don't think it's going to change very much. So a few other bits before I go to questions. Parachain deployment. Anyone interested in this, in how we will work out which parachains get which slots? One or two smiles and hands. So, we've only just really come up with a solution that we're happy with. As with all solutions that you're happy with just now, it might be subject to some change in the future, but I will nonetheless, I'd like to go over our current thoughts. So, we're going to quantize things. We're going to split the parachains up into 6-month slots, right? So, over a period of time, parachain slots, so where parachains can sit, we'll have sort of 6-month chunks, yeah. So when a parachain comes and goes, it will be at like either the beginning of the year or 6 months into the year at the end of June, right? It won't be anywhere else in the year. So everything happens either in 1st of January or 1st of July. Yeah, I mean, or whatever, if it's different date for launch, then maybe the 1st of November and the 1st of May. They will be auctioned or sold off or whatever 2 years at a time, right? So 6-month slots, so 4 slots make 2 years. So every time there's a sort of auction, there'll be 4 slots auctioned off. Now they won't necessarily all be auctioned off to the same bidder, right? I'll come to that later. But you'll get the ability to basically buy a period of time in a slot of up to 2 years at once. There are several lots for each of those slots. So a lot is just like another instance of it, right? So it's not that there'll only be one parachain slot, one parachain's worth of Polkadot time, but there'll be a bunch of like 4 or 5, right? And they'll sort of potentially all happen at the same auction. Or they may be staggered throughout the period running up to where that slot begins. Now the auctions will be candle auctions. You're probably not familiar with candle auctions. I didn't even know the term when it came up. But a candle auction is basically an open auction, right? So everyone can make bids, and they do so in the open. But it has a random ending time. So you never know when it's going to end until it ends. Yeah? The reason that we do it this way is because we want to allow smart contracts to take part in the auctions. So it can't be a sealed auction or a closed auction, because smart contracts fundamentally would have a disadvantage because they can never seal anything. They're fully transparent. So with an open auction, it's actually kind of difficult to implement a candle auction on a blockchain because the source of randomness of a blockchain is pretty difficult to secure. Generally, there will always be an actor on a blockchain that has an advantage because they can make a decision as to whether to do something or not do something, and doing something might mean that the auction ends, and not doing something might mean that it doesn't. Very difficult. So, in order to get around that little problem, we're going to have retroactive ending. So what this means is that the auction continues, but at some point, it decides that actually it didn't end just now, it ended 40 blocks ago. And all of the bids of the last 40 blocks are therefore invalid. And what that does is it means that smart contracts can basically compete on a reasonably equal footing with real people, or real organizations outside of blockchain that are not constrained by acting in a deterministic fashion. Now the way that the retroactive, it's a bit of a pain to implement, but that's basically the way that we want to do it. So as I mentioned before, the idea is to have the auctions potentially staggered throughout the period that they're being auctioned for. Yeah, sorry, staggered throughout the period just before that they're being auctioned for. So if, let's say, we're in the first 6 months of Polkadot, and let's, for argument's sake, say it begins January the 1st, next January the 1st, then the auctions for the slots beginning July the 1st, 2020, yeah, so next, not this July coming, but the next July, a year from now, in July, then the auctions will be staggered throughout the first half of next year, yeah? For that 2-year period, or 4 6-month chunks going from July. Now the bidders of these auctions can be parachains, so they can be existing parachains. Existing parachains can bid for new slots, yeah? So as a parachain, you might be in your, I don't know, you might have done 12 months, and you might be in your 2nd year now, and let's say you bought 2 years. So you've got a 2-year sort of slot, or 4 slots, totaling 2 years. You might want to say, well, this is great, and I want to get another 2 years, or another year at least. Now you can bid with your existing deposit, because the way it works is you bid with deposits, you don't pay, you just stick a load of dots down as your sort of, as a deposit, as a bond. You can bid with that existing capital on new slots in order to essentially extend at the market rate your time on the relay chain. New bidders, so not necessarily parachain, if it's not parachains, if it's new bidders, they can be accounts, just like normal accounts, like, you know, controlled by a person or an organization, or they can be existing parachains bidding on behalf of something inside them, like a smart contract or maybe one of their accounts. So smart contracts can now bid for parachain slots. And what that means is that you can now basically do kind of ICOs or fundraising operations that are contractually obligated to use the funds to bid for a parachain slot and return them if they're not successful. Yeah. Okay, so an example auction, just to sort of make that all a bit clearer, because it's probably clear as mud at the moment. So here's an example. This won't probably happen exactly with these numbers, but just to give you an impression. So 2 years. Yeah. So we got 6 month slots, 4 slots, totaling 2 years. Yeah. In this case, we've got 2 slots worth, 1 slot and the other slot, and this is first quarter. First and second quarter 2020, third and fourth quarter 2020, first and second quarter 2021, third and fourth quarter 2021. Yeah. So very simple timescale. Total of 8 lots. Each one of these is like a lot. They're kind of different because these 2 are for that time, and these 2 are for that time, and these 2 are for that time, and these 2 are for that time. So you got like 4 different periods of time, and 2 for each period. And that might form the slots, the total slots that are being put to auction for one particular given time. Now you might have a bunch of bids. These are standing bids. So they put a bid in, and then it just sort of stays there until either it's successful or the bidder removes it. Yeah? So these are standing bids. And you can bid for ranges. So you don't need to bid for all 4, and you also don't need to bid for individual ones. Because you don't want to like bid for 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then find out that you've got these 3, but someone else got you on this one, and then you've got what? 3 slots, but they don't connect with each other. That would be awful. So you can bid on ranges where basically you bid for the total price that you'll pay for that range. So in this case, this bidder, purple, is bidding on the whole range, 1 to 4, and they're willing to pay 40 dots or whatever. Yeah, they're willing to deposit 40 dots. The blue one is only interested in these last 3, 2 to 4, and they're willing to pay 35 for those last 3. This guy, yellow, is willing to pay 1 dot. He's just bidding on the first slot 1, and he's willing to pay deposit 25 dots for that, and so on. You can see how they've each got different ranges and different prices. And so what we do is we have an algorithm that picks out the best, the most price that can be deposited for each bunch of slots. And in this case, it's yellow and blue, and they get 60 deposited for the total, as a total amount for those 4. And then the second one comes along, and it's a couple of reds, a purple, and an orange, and then it gets 41 for those. Yeah? These guys don't get anything. There are only 2, and there's only so many to give out. So this is roughly, it's not final, but it will give you some rough idea of how it will work, at the moment at least. So pre-launch, there'll be some slots, some number of slots that we feel confident putting out and making sure make it happen for launch time. And they will last the 2 years. Yeah? Or they'll between them last for 2 years. There might be different projects that own slots in this 2 year period, even for the same parachain, but there it is. In principle, we may also auction off some more sort of 3 months in if we're happy that it can support more parachains. Then 6 months in, or by 6 months in, these additional slots will come available. So now there's 24 in total. And then 12 months in, so during this period, another bunch of slots will be auctioned. And then furthermore, another bunch of slots over the following 6 period, and so on, until eventually you get to 2 years in, where these will come up for auction again alongside any new ones that are being put out. Right? So the total number of slots in operation will grow over time. But as the ones that have already been sold off hit their 2-year endpoint, they will need to be re-auctioned. Yeah? And eventually we'll probably get to the maximum number of slots. I mean, I don't know what that is yet, but somewhere probably between about 10 and 1,000. And at that point, we will just keep re-auctioning them, and they'll essentially be staggered, and it'll be 2 years maximum at a time. So I'll clean up a few bits as well to do with permissioning. So there's no permission needed. Like, I don't know if I'm not sure if anyone was ever confused about this, but I've had 1 or 2 questions about it, so I figure it's worth making it clear. No permission is needed to own DOT tokens, or to validate on Polkadot, or to vote on Polkadot, or to be on the Polkadot Council. Like there's part of the governance mechanism is the council thing. If you want to be on the council thing and you've got the votes, you don't need any opponent's permission. Or to bid on a parachain slot, or to deploy or operate a parachain, no permission needed. Or to utilize a parachain, no permission needed there either. No permission needed. Yeah? Furthermore, there's no explicit mechanism for governance to do anything to a parachain. Block, disable, whatever. Now, of course, governance is a omnipotent force within Polkadot. Polkadot is designed to be a governable, upgradable, fundamentally sort of soft-coded blockchain, and part of the need to ensure that happens is that governance is ultimately omnipotent. But numerous safeguards are in place to try to ensure that the governance mechanism can't sort of act badly or against the interests of the wider Polkadot ecosystem. And I would say there's probably about as much chance, or at least we're trying to design it so there's about as much chance as the governance system doing something stupid like randomly blocking a parachain or randomly removing somebody's funds from their account, as there is of the Ethereum Foundation backing a hard fork in order to kill off some unlucky person's account. Okay, I hope I was clear on that. So I'd like to move on to one of the more interesting developments in Polkadot, technologically speaking, and something that I think the protocol was in substantial need of. Now I can't claim to have come up with this one myself. This comes from Reddit by someone under the moniker /u/Tawaran. I don't know who that is, but kudos to them. They called it smart protocols. I'm not so keen on that term. I'm calling it Spree, which is the name of the river that runs through Berlin, if you're interested. Spree stands for Shared Protected Runtime Execution Enclaves. Now, here's the problem. We have some guarantees that Polkadot Relay Chain gives you. One parachain will never be reverted alone, right? So there's no chance that a single parachain will be reverted without all of the other parachains also being reverted, yeah? Everything moves in lockstep with the relay chain's consensus. Furthermore, the Polkadot relay chain guarantees that any messages arriving at your parachain will definitely have been sent from the parachain they claim to have been sent from a valid state transition on that parachain. Yeah? So there's no way how any malicious actors can make a parachain do something that its code didn't explicitly make it do, didn't explicitly lead to or define as should have been done. Now what that means is that if you code a couple of token contracts, one on one parachain, another on another parachain, and you have them send messages between each other, and one of them does something that's very important, happened because for the other parachain to act upon that message would be a very critical thing. It should never act upon unless it's absolutely certain that the sending parachain actually did something. I'll give you an example because that wasn't very clear. Suppose you have a token contract, right? Two parachains. They want to share a token. They're going to share the Bitcoin token, right? So it's not the real Bitcoin token, but it's a two-way peg of a Bitcoin token. And they want to ensure that if ever anyone sends a Bitcoin token from one parachain to the other parachain, the total number of Bitcoin tokens between the two parachains remain the same. That's critical, yeah? So if one of them sends a message to the other one that says, hey, other one, I just completely reduced to nothing 10 Bitcoins on this parachain. It's crucial that you increase your total of the Bitcoin tokens by 10. Because if you don't, the total between us will be wrong. It will be different. And it's critical that it stays the same. Yeah? Great. That works fine as long as both of them can trust that message. Now, Polkadot will guarantee that the message, that neither will be reverted, so you can trust the message won't sort of be reverted or won't have been reverted. And you can trust that the parachain sort of validly transitioned, but you'd also have to trust the parachain's logic, yeah? Because if its state transition logic was wrong, and if there was a bug in it or something that allowed it to send 2 of those, hey, I burned 10 Bitcoin tokens, while only really burning 10, right? If it could send 2 messages out, then you would have just created 10 Bitcoin tokens from nothing. The total between them would have gone up by 10, yeah? So if there's ever any way to if there's ever any bug that allows you to send more messages than you're really taking action for, then there's a big problem. Now, as long as the code remains the same, then it's basically fine, because you assume that if the code remains the same, then any bugs are going to be shared between the two, and if there's any bugs in it, then it's badly broken anyway. But what if we're saying, hey, look, you can upgrade your parachains. Well, this is a bit of a problem, because if you upgrade your parachain, then it means the code might change on one end, but not the other, yeah? And if the code changes on one end and not the other, then that means that the code could change and have a bug in it. And if that happens, then you might end up with more Bitcoin tokens than you expected, and your economy will be compromised. Now, as long as we want to keep parachains upgrading, be able to be upgraded, then there's only basically 2 workarounds that we can do. We can either take the code for all these token contracts and put them in a central kind of hub parachain, yeah, whose code never changes, yeah, or only changes all at the same time, and then have all the parachains, if they ever want to send tokens, they have to send a message to the hub that then sends the tokens and sends a message on to the receiving parachain. But that's a bit horrible, because now we've got 2 messages, whereas before we only had 1, and we have to have a whole extra parachain just to handle this stuff, which introduces additional transactional complexity. The other thing that we can do is we can have the parachains query each other and say, hey, has your code changed yet? Because if it has, I don't trust you to act upon my message until my governance has decided to audit your code and decided it's all okay. But that's a bit of a pain as well, because every time a parachain upgrades, you don't really want to have to see all of the parachains have to check that it's been upgraded properly. So what do? This is where these enclaves come in. So these guys allow parachains to opt in to special code fragments. They're a little bit like sharded smart contracts, right? They're kind of like multiple instances of the same smart contract, but each instance sits sort of inside a parachain. The parachain can't touch it. It can only sort of call functions on it, but it can't touch its internal state. So the internal state is governed only by this logic, and that logic is shared between all instances, all on the different parachains. So in the case of our token example, this logic would just basically be, it would handle the burn, right? The burn instruction and the sending the, hey, I burned these tokens message. So it would ensure that that message, if it were ever sent, that the balance actually went down as the content of the message implies. You would no longer have to trust the logic on the parachain to actually reduce the balance, because you'd be guaranteed that if you receive this message, then this shared logic fragment would actually be reducing the balance. Yeah. And you could be guaranteed that that logic fragment did it rather than any other bit of the parachain, because basically the Polkadot protocol guarantees that that message can't be sent unless the logic that you think was executed actually was executed. So these things have their own storage, right? Their own state, separate from the parachain state, and their own messaging endpoint. So you can identify it when it's them that's sending the message as opposed to other logic or another parachain. And all instances across the parachains have identical logic. So you can be guaranteed that when you receive these messages, that logic was executed faithfully. Yeah, it was the right logic. It definitely checked the balance was above 0. It definitely checked that it was allowed to send the 10 Bitcoin, and it definitely reduced the balance by 10 after sell before sending the message. But the cool thing is that it executes inside the same kind of logistical environment as the parachain. It's executed by the same set of nodes. Yeah. So it's not a separate parachain that's executed all by different nodes and has its own resource pool, but it's the same parachain, the same collator nodes, and the same logic of Polkadot, the same validator subsets that check this logic happens. So it doesn't actually cost any more in terms of system resources. So here's like a fairly rough sketch of how it will work. So you've got your main parachains here and here. That's their logic. It's different, right? Might be upgraded, don't know. Parachain A, parachain B. And then you have this extra bit. It sits alongside the parachain. The same nodes execute. Yeah? Sits as well here. And they're kind of trust wormholes because these guys, although they're really far away from each other, they always execute on different nodes. They can trust each other because the code that is executing and the message set that they understand are identical. And then there's synchronous connectivity, so basically just local function calls that go between the main parachain code, the bulk of the code, and these little gateways. In principle, if you wanted to like upgrade this code, you could, but it would all be upgraded at the same time because the code is only stored in one place on the relay chain. Yeah. So if you ever upgraded it, it would only be upgraded there. And what this does, ultimately, is it solves a very general problem, which is trust between parachains. This allows you to come along with a whole new parachain concept, but take part in all of the existing Polkadot contracts, the existing Polkadot inter-parachain contracts. And that is even the case when parachains upgrade themselves. They can change their logic as much as they want. But all of the other parachains, when they use these trust wormholes to communicate with them, will be able to ensure that the logic that they think the parachain is executing actually is the logic that should be executing. Okay, that's more or less the end. I'll just give you a quick update on technical progress. So we just released, we're in the process of releasing Substrate 1.0. The first release candidate was released last week. Some continuous bug fixes, but basically that's out of the door. Polkadot POC 4 also was recently released. That's the first Polkadot that's based on Substrate 1.0. It's got the full staking system that I just outlined before. And the Alexander testnet has been upgraded, obviously a runtime upgrade there, in order to be compliant with the POC4 code. Currently in progress, and sort of eventually hoping to finish this off quite soon. Offline fragment, which is basically the staking system, will be more offline based in order to allow a more optimal solution set. Interchain messaging, which is mostly done, but still needs one or two additional points, but that should be rolled out throughout the lifetime of POC4. The final governance mechanism, again, that's just being tweaked a little bit from what we had. And the Babe block production system, which is a little earlier on at the moment, and that's going to take probably a month or so to get finished off. Okay, that's the bulk of the talk. I would like to invite questions.